In the heart of Europe's greatest cultural festivals, millions of people cheered wildly. They came, dressed in their finest elegant fashion, to celebrate modern civilization. But the main attraction wasn't a revolutionary machine or a beautiful work of art. It was a massive iron enclosure built strictly for human exhibition. Heavy iron chains were locked tightly to keep the desperate prisoners contained inside. Entire villages were ripped from their homelands and forced into artificial jungle enclosures. Proud kings, fierce warriors, and innocent families were displayed exactly like zoo animals. What they didn't realize was the devastating psychological toll this would take. The late 19th century saw global empires desperately scrambling to justify their conquests. They needed their citizens to believe that stripping entire continents of their natural wealth was a noble, civilizing mission rather than a ruthless corporate extraction. To convince their populations, they needed a compelling visual narrative. Behind closed doors, elite military officers meticulously planned exactly how they would divide the land and exploit its people for unprecedented financial gain. In the dark, humid depths of the Congo rainforest, King Leopold's ruthless mercenaries were violently plundering the region. They extracted thousands of tons of precious rubber, leaving a horrifying trail of absolute devastation in their wake. Colonial agents were dispatched deep into the African interior with highly specific, deceptive instructions. They approached peaceful village elders with fraudulent treaties, deliberately manipulating local leaders who had absolutely no idea they were signing away their sovereignty. Meanwhile, massive World's Fairs constructed elaborate pavilions. These sprawling, illuminated monuments were intentionally designed to showcase the technological superiority of the Western world, while completely hiding the staggering human cost required to build them. Towering modern structures completely dominated the skyline. They projected an undeniable aura of absolute technological invincibility, mesmerizing the wealthy crowds who wandered through the glowing exhibits, entirely blind to the atrocities funding their entertainment. But thousands of miles away, entire peaceful communities were completely unaware of the coming storm. They lived in deeply complex, traditionally rich societies, completely isolated from the terrifying greed of the industrialized empires. Without warning, heavily armed colonial forces suddenly ambushed them. They marched aggressively into the African villages, violently setting the beautiful wooden huts ablaze. In minutes, centuries of cultural heritage were reduced to smoldering ash. The fleeing survivors were aggressively hunted down, brutally wrapped in rusted iron chains, and taken captive. Marched through the dark jungle, they were completely stripped of their freedom, violently separated from their ancient homelands. If you are enjoying this deep dive into Africa's untold history, consider subscribing to uncover more forgotten empires. These devastated communities were forcefully boarded onto overcrowded, dark steamships. Thrust directly into the freezing, misty harbors of New York, they huddled on cold steel decks, facing a terrifying, unfamiliar industrial world. Among these captives was Ota Benga, an incredibly resilient, intelligent young man. Wrapped tightly in a coarse wool blanket against the freezing cold, his face radiated absolute, unbroken dignity, despite the chaotic snowy city swirling around him. Purchased by a self-proclaimed explorer, Ota was dragged to the St. Louis World's Fair. He was forced to walk through an overwhelming sea of spectators, profoundly isolated. Millions gawked at him. Wealthy crowds pressed their faces against heavy wire fences, laughing cruelly. They turned his profound cultural heritage into a cheap, degrading sideshow. But that wasn't their real strategy. Inside dark, opulent gentlemen's clubs, powerful organizers conspired. They planned to use these human exhibits to manufacture a deeply racist, pseudo-scientific hierarchy. They wielded skull measurements to falsely claim absolute racial superiority. Cold, clinical desks were covered in terrifyingly precise iron calipers, aggressively pinching phrenology models, constructing a dangerous lie disguised as biological truth. The curators actively encouraged the public to physically harass the captives. Spectators aggressively threw objects through the heavy iron bars. Uniformed zookeepers stood nearby, laughing dismissively, deliberately stripping away every ounce of their humanity. But one brilliant, defiant captive was about to shatter their illusion forever. Ancient African bronze artifacts stood as powerful witnesses to the incredible artistic brilliance the colonial empires desperately tried to erase. Following the World's Fair, Ota Benga was forcibly transferred to the Bronx Zoo. Eager Victorian crowds poured through the grand stone gates, completely unaware they were entering one of the darkest exhibitions in American history. A massive iron sign reading "Primate House" marked his absolute humiliation. Imposingly looming over the dark stone entrance, the heavy, rusted letters created a profoundly demeaning atmosphere. In a deeply controversial move, he was locked inside the primate enclosure alongside an orangutan. Sitting quietly behind heavy iron bars, Ota maintained his composure in the cold, unnatural indoor zoo lighting. The zookeepers deliberately showcased his sharpened teeth to portray him as a terrifying savage. White men forcefully held wooden pointers near his face, using intrusive vintage flashbulbs to capture historically manipulated photographs. They doubled down, adding a bow and arrow to complete the offensive caricature. Forcefully handed stereotypical wooden weapons, his face etched with deep, burning resentment, he stared fiercely into the cold daylight. Ota himself began to actively resist. Standing powerfully at the very edge of his enclosure, he shouted back fiercely. His unyielding posture caused groups of harassing spectators to immediately back away in absolute terror. The local newspapers ruthlessly sensationalized the event. Massive, heavy industrial printing presses spun violently, stamping fresh ink onto broadsheets, generating sensationalized headlines that fueled a deeply racist frenzy across the nation. Headlines screamed across the country. Bustling street newsstands were covered in hundreds of stacked broadsheets, featuring crude, racist caricatures that completely normalized the horrific, unforgivable abuse. However, this brazen act finally triggered a powerful backlash. A coalition of prominent black clergymen gathered on the cobblestone city streets. Their expressions were filled with furious, fiercely determined resolve. They were ready for war. Reverend James Gordon led a brilliant, coordinated protest against the zoo's untouchable benefactors. Standing at a heavy wooden pulpit, he delivered a fiery, passionate speech, raising his hand powerfully in the air. The mayor of New York was suddenly flooded with furious telegrams. A massive, overwhelming pile of frantic paper messages aggressively overflowed his highly polished oak desk, placing unbearable political pressure on the city administration. The zoo directors arrogantly ignored the protests. Smug, incredibly wealthy organizers in sharp, tailored suits dropped crumpled letters onto their mahogany desks, completely dismissing the immense human suffering unfolding just a few feet away. Powerful white donors argued fiercely. Inside opulent boardrooms, wealthy men yelled and violently slammed their fists onto polished mahogany tables, completely enraged that their absolute authority was being aggressively challenged. But the pressure aggressively mounted. A furious crowd of tightly packed protesters gathered outside the towering wrought iron gates of the Bronx Zoo, shouting and pushing violently against the iron bars. Mounted police struggled violently to hold back the thousands of angry citizens. Officers aggressively rode massive horses directly into the chaotic crowd, swinging wooden batons, creating a highly explosive, terrifying atmosphere. Finally, the deeply embarrassed zoo administration was forced to quietly release him. Under the cover of thick, cold fog, Ota walked out through the massive iron gates, accompanied closely by his protector. Ota stepped out of the freezing cages, warmly welcomed into a supportive Brooklyn church community. Sitting at a long, crowded dining table, surrounded by beautifully dressed black families, he offered a tentative, gentle smile. Ota was relocated to an orphanage and later to Virginia. Wearing a simple, clean suit, he sat peacefully at a wooden desk, carefully practicing his writing in a notebook, bathed in soft afternoon sunlight. He walked freely through the Virginia forests, trying to heal. Reaching out to gently touch the rough bark of a towering ancient pine tree, he found a fleeting sense of quiet peace. He desperately wanted to return to his beloved homeland in the Congo. Standing on a high grassy hill overlooking the vast ocean, he stared out toward the horizon, carrying an expression of profound, unbreakable longing. With a purchased steamship ticket in hand, he finally believed he was going home. His hands carefully held the ornate passenger ticket, representing his absolute final chance to reclaim his stolen freedom. But the devastating outbreak of the First World War violently shattered his final hope. Massive, terrifying dreadnought battleships violently cut through crashing dark waves, effectively shutting down all transatlantic civilian travel. Heartbroken and hopelessly trapped in America, Ota built a traditional ceremonial fire. Deep in the dark forest at midnight, the glowing orange firelight illuminated his profoundly heartbroken face, performing a solemn, final tribute to his ancestors. In the darkness of the night, he tragically ended his own life. A single discarded vintage pistol lay abandoned on the forest floor, as a thin wisp of smoke slowly rose into the cold moonlight. Historians later documented the horrific psychological impact of these ethnological exhibitions. Modern archivists, turning the fragile pages of leather-bound zoo ledgers, found overwhelming evidence of the profound cruelty, confirming the scientific establishment fully understood the human cost. The rusted, abandoned iron cages still stand today. Heavily overgrown with creeping green vines, the empty enclosures sit quietly in the cinematic mist, standing as dark, forgotten monuments to an era that desperately tried to erase its cruelty. Ota Benga's tragic story stands as a profoundly devastating indictment of scientific racism. His intensely intelligent eyes convey an entire lifetime of profound pain, mixed with absolute, unbroken dignity and a silent, unforgettable judgment. And this was only one chapter of Africa's lost archives. Click the video on your screen right now to explore the next untold story.